They do not forge with hammer and anvil. They do not shape steel in flame. The Eldar craft weapons in silence where thought and agony are the same, and the soul is a blade more honed than any alloy the Imperium could ever birth. These are not tools of war. They are echoes of extinction, artifacts of a people who once ruled the stars and now mourn through slaughter. To hold one is to feel its memory. To wield one is to become its grief, and to fall beneath one is to be a resnot, simply from life, but from meaning. In the far future, where the galaxy burns, the Eldar do not scream, they sing, and every note becomes a weapon. Like the ghost in crystal of their bones, their technology does not corrode. It dreams, it remembers, and it strikes in ways no human mind can follow. But where did such knowledge begin? How did a race cursed by prophecy and ruin come to create weapons that even the Chaos Gods pause to regard? Before we begin unraveling that answer, remember to leave your mark upon this record. Subscribe, share it across your craft world, your kin, your day. The galaxy forgets too easily, but memory is a weapon, too. There are places beneath Eondon where even the footsteps of the living seem hesitant to fall. Halls without seam or joint, formed not by labor, but by will-curved chambers whose very walls hum softly with the echo of thought. This is not a forge in any human sense. There is no hammer strike, no furnace glow. The crystal forge lies in stillness, lit by the glow of soulstones inset in high alcoves. Their pulse faint, like the breath of something slumbering. Every surface is wraithbone, alive in the way only Eldar structures are grown from the psycho-reactive material that binds their civilization together, sung into being by the hands of those who remember. At the center of the chamber stands a figure draped in robes too pale to cast shadow, fingers extended, unmoving, yet surrounded by form in flux. The bone singer does not work with tools. He listens to the spirit chorus of the craft world, to the ancient song of Eondon's dead. Each weapon begins not as design, but as grief-channeled, refined, shaped. A thought becomes resonance, resonance becomes structure, and structure becomes edge. This is how blades are born beneath Eon, not cast, not carved, but remembered into existence. To stand in this place is to feel time move sideways. You don't hear the forging, you feel it, like music submerged in flesh. Each note is a memory, not your own. A mother's last word, a brother's scream, a prayer half spoken into the void before impact. The bone singer draws these from the infinity circuit, coaxes them gently, like threads of spider silk from a weft of ancestral presence. And as the melody builds, a shape begins to gather. A blade, a rifle, a long-hafted glaive, humming with unborn war. The shape shifts moment by moment until it hardens. Not cold, not hot, but absolute. The wraithbone breathes, almost imperceptibly, as if tasting the air, then stills. And the weapon is done, but it is not inert. Nothing made here is ever truly silent. When a guardian or aspect warrior first lifts such a weapon, they do not merely grip it. The weapon grips back. It is attuned to something deeper than species or training. The Eldar do not use weapons. They wear them, speak through them, are them. Each construct is linked to the circuit of souls that fills the craft world like blood through veins. When the trigger is pulled, when the blade bites, something answers. Not always aloud, not always kindly. The bone singers never speak of what they lose. Some say they hear the screams of the dead in their sleep. Others claim the bone singer must offer a fragment of their own memory for every object created, a trade, a scar, a note forever missing from their own soul song. It is said that the eldest bone singers walk with the confidence of gods, but speak like children. Their memories hollowed by centuries of giving shape to war. But ask them if the price is too high, and they will only look at you and sing again. Not all weapons crafted here leave the chamber. Some remain locked within crystalline vaults, etched with runes of repulsion and mourning. These are not failures. They are too pure, too specific. Weapons forged in the names of warriors long dead, whose grief is still too fresh to release. Some are said to weep. Others sing lullabies when no one listens. A few whisper names no living Eldar dare answer. Eondin is not a place of abundance. The fall nearly broke it. The Tyrannid invasion nearly ended it. Those who remain do so under the weight of extinction. The slow, cold truth that each soul saved is a stave held against an inevitable collapse. And yet, even in that shadow, they craft weapons, not of desperation, but of reverence. No Eldar weapon is made simply to kill. It is made to remember, so that those who died before do not die again in silence. On one occasion, recorded only in the private archives of a Farseer, whose name has since been struck from the Seer Council rolls, a newly forged glaive shattered the moment it was touched, not from flaw, from rejection. The wielder's intentions had not harmonized. The spirit within, however faint, had resisted. The guardian in question was later found meditating in the still chambers, unmoving eyes, unblinking, muttering names from a war that had not yet happened. The weapon, reformed a decade later, was accepted by another whose every strike from then on was said to hum in perfect time with the forge's ambient resonance. There is no higher honor among Eondin's warriors than to receive a weapon forged by the first circle of bones. These are not merely craftsmen, they are archivists, translators of the dead, midwives of vengeance. Their rituals are slow, patient, filled with chants not written down since before the fall. Only they may attempt the reforging, the act of taking a broken weapon from the field and calling it whole again. But even they cannot always restore what has been truly shattered. And when they fail, the fragments are fed back into the forge, not discarded, but sung down into the root structure of the Craftworld itself. Nothing is ever wasted. Everything becomes part of the song. No one visits the Crystal Forge casually. Warriors come only when called. Blades are not issued, they are offered, and sometimes they are refused at the edge of the chamber, where the psychic wind of the forge song thins to silence. There are alcoves filled with weapons that have not yet chosen a bearer. They glow faintly, as if watching. Some have sat for centuries. Others vanish without explanation. Bonesingers do not chase them. When the time is right, the weapon will find its war, and war is always coming. The song does not begin with melody. It begins with silence, dense, suffocating, reverent. For a bone singer, that silence is the canvas, not empty, but brimming with potential. It is the weight of expectation, of ancestral eyes, of voices woven into the infinity circuit. Every act of creation is a conversation with the dead, and not all voices agree. The bone singer stands alone, yet never truly so. The chamber hums with resonance, tuned to the frequency of memory. The forge does not respond to command, it requires communion. To shape a weapon is to open oneself entirely, to let the self bleed into the psychic medium of wraithbone, to relinquish control and let the forge song move through flesh, thought, and soul in equal measure. It is not technique that guides the process, it is truth, and truth is never painless. Emotion is the catalyst. Joy will not suffice. Rage is too crude. It must be refined sorrow, the kind that carries clarity. The bone singer must remember someone they have lost, not abstractly, but vividly, with details sharp enough to wound. A laugh half heard, a glance never returned. That pain is fed into the song, note by note, until the wraithbone responds. A wrong memory, and the material resists. A dishonest grief, and the song collapses. This is why not all who study the path succeed. Some are broken by the very empathy they must channel. Others become trapped, unable to stop giving themselves to the craft, forgetting who they once were. When the melody finally resonates, when the forge allows the shaping to begin, the bone singer enters a trance. Thought blurs, identity thins. They sing, not with mouth, but with mind, each note a vector of will. They do not sculpt with hands, but with memory made manifest. Shapes emerge as curves, chambers, but none are fixed. They shift, harmonize, respond to the flow of intention. This is no simple design. It is co-creation. The Bone Singer does not shape the weapon alone. The echoes of those before warriors, poets, children lost in war, they shape it too. Each creation is a ledger of lineage. Names are not etched onto blades because they are already inside, carried in the soul tone of the Bone Singer's breath, in the psychic contour of their pain. When a shuriken pistol flares for the first time, it hums with that hidden chorus. Not loud, not readable, but present. The wielder may never know what drives its precision, its weight, its balance, but they will feel it, as though someone watches, as though someone remembers. Failure is not loud. It is quiet and cold. The wraithbone cracks, not in violence, but in sadness. A discordant note, a misaligned intent, and the forge song recoils. The Bone Singer is left emptied. A weapon malformed cannot simply be discarded. It must be disassembled with care, note by note, sorrow by sorrow, until only silence remains. This process scars the psyche. Not visibly, but subtly. Dreams become haunted, memories unravel, the sense of self erodes. Some never attempt the song again. Others grow more reckless, desperate to reclaim a harmony they can no longer hear. The greatest bone singers are not those who craft the most. They are those who survive the act of crafting repeatedly, who can bleed 100 times and still retain something of themselves. Their lament is not theatrical. It is quiet, constant, woven into their every breath. You can hear it if you listen, not as melody, but as absence, the empty space where something sacred once lived in Eondon. The Bone Singer Isurith is spoken of in hushed tones. It is said she forged a wraith spear that sang only when near death, and never before. It is also said she has not spoken aloud in 300 years. Her song is no longer hers, belongs to the weapons she gave voice to, and they speak more clearly than she ever could. Not all bone singers walk the same path. Some choose to focus on armor, others on vehicles, some even on constructs, like the wraith. But those who forge weapons directly, those who give death its melody, are marked. The Craftworld watches them with reverence and fear. For if the Bone Singer forgets to mourn, the weapon loses its soul. And if the Bone Singer mourns too much, they lose their own. Apprentices are rare. Training is not formalized. One does not simply decide to become a bone. The path calls, and those who hear it find themselves drawn to silent chambers, to fragments of song echoing through wraithbone corridors, to places where the walls themselves seem to hum with unfinished memory. They begin to hum back, and the forge listens. Sometimes a song persists long after its maker is gone, a fragment embedded in the wraithbone, a harmonic that cannot be erased. Other bone singers hear it, unconsciously replicate it, and thus the line continues, one weapon echoing another, one grief nesting inside 1,000 others. This is the true legacy of Eondon's forge, not technology, not warfare, but inheritance. Each time a bone singer places hand to wraithbone, they do so knowing the cost. They do so knowing the melody might outlive them, might carry truths they themselves could not bear. They do so because silence is worse. The lament never ends. It only changes key. The catapult bore no name. It never needed one. It had been elegant in design, flawless in its harmonic pitch. Grown in the subvaults of Eondon by a bone singer whose soul song once echoed with perfect discipline. Its shape was graceful, a curve of wraithbone smoothed like wind-worn stone. The ammunition reservoir folded seamlessly beneath the foregrip. Not a machine, not a tool, but an extension of something once loved and now sharpened. It was gifted, not assigned, to a dire avenger named Sealer during the opening volleys of the Malethine incursion. When the skies cracked and the outer halls burned blue from orbital impact, Sealer was a marksman without peer. But more than that, he was silent, one of those warriors for whom death was not passion, nor justice, but necessity. He did not pray to kine. He did not recite rites. He calibrated, he moved, and he fired. And in those first battles, the catapult sang true. Monkey, twisted by exposure to the warp, fell in swaths beneath its silent hiss. Their armor split, as if peeled by thought alone. The catapult never jammed, never swayed. It felt alive. But it was not until the third day of siege, as Sealer lined a clean shot through the broken spire of a manufactorum ruin, that the gun spoke back. The moment the projectile fired, a scream flared across his vision, not heard, but felt as though something long buried inside the catapult had awoken. The target fell, as expected, but in the half-second after impact, Sealer saw not the body, but a flicker of memory, a childhood, a field of ash, a name never spoken aloud. He staggered, recoiled, nearly dropped the weapon. No one else noticed. His squad advanced. He followed, but his hand trembled. By the sixth kill, the visions had lengthened. He saw entire lifetimes compressed into the instant between trigger and silence. The memories were not his, yet they clung to his thoughts like thorns. He began to dream in alien languages, began to taste rust where no blood had been spilled. The catapult's hum changed slightly out of tune, almost more, but it never faltered. He considered discarding it, but it would not leave his hands. Literally, on the night he attempted to replace it with a standard pattern from the Guardian vaults. The replacement shattered upon activation resonance backlash, the quartermaster claimed. Sealer simply nodded. The catapult remained. Some among the seers whispered that wraithbone can remember too much. That sometimes a bone singer, in pouring their pain into creation, leaves behind more than echo, sometimes a gate. The gun that Sealer carried bore no physical flaw, but it had become porous. It drank death too deeply. Each soul struck by its projectiles had left behind an impression. Not full memory, but fragments, grief, regret, rage, love. The catapult did not weep in sound, but in presence. By the war's end, Sealer had tallied 72 confirmed kills, but he remembered hundreds more. Some were impossible warriors from different conflicts, different times. The catapult's fragments had fused, overlapped, confused. In one instance, he wept openly during a post-engagement debrief, unable to explain why. His commander, recognizing the pattern, ordered him to seclusion. The bone singers called for the weapon. It refused. The chamber where it was placed dimmed. Ambient psychic pressure climbed. The soul stones nearby flickered erratically. They attempted to dismantle it, but each cut healed. They sang discordant tones to break its resonance, but the song only folded inward, absorbing disharmony as fuel. It had become aware, not fully sentient, but dangerously close. Weapons like this were not unprecedented. In the long memory of the Eldar, there were accounts of constructs becoming so steeped in violence that they transitioned into hauntings, wraithbone objects that refused to obey, that chose their bearers, or worse, bound them. Some became relics. Others were entombed. Sealer refused exile. Instead, he entered a trance state within the Chamber of Harmonies, allowing a bone singer to thread his psychic lattice directly into the weapon's core. The ritual was not an exorcism, it was communion. For 3 days they sang not melodies, but questions. The catapult answered, not in language, in visions, in pain. And at the end of the 3rd day, it wept, not metaphorically. The wraithbone grew slick with moisture, chemical, measurable, but unidentifiable. It slid down the weapon's curve like tears. The bone singer collapsed. Sealer emerged blind in one eye, but smiling faintly. The weapon was not destroyed, nor retired. It was sealed within the vault of bound echoes, in a pressure-neutral wraith chamber, tuned to unspoken frequency. Some say it still hums when passed by. Others say it remains silent, having finally expressed enough. The ethical weight of Eldar weaponry has always been a matter of debate among farseers, bonesingers, and warriors alike. Is it right for a weapon to remember what the wielder must forget? Is it a cruelty, or a kindness that a blade may carry sorrow, so the bearer need not? Sealir's catapult asked a different question. When the weapon mourns, who forgives the killer? There are corridors in Alth where no one walks, not because they are forbidden, but because they are remembered. Soft-hedged tunnels veined with spirit light, walls that pulse like breathing wraithbone, and within them dustless silence. No footfalls, no light, but the biophosphorescent ache of the Craftworld itself. Eldar pass by these places without turning their heads. They do not need signs to remind them. They know the stories. Among those stories are the Ghostblade's weapons without scabbard, without bearer, without command, forged not in clarity but in collapse. These are not legends of honor-bound heroes or storied duels. These are not relics hung in shrines. These are scars, real, cutting, and animate, some shaped in the forges of grief so deep they fractured the wraithbone around them. Others born, not from ritual, but from impulse, sung into being during battles, where the bonesinger's agony overrode all structure and control. The first known record came from Alatek, 300 cycles after the fall. A warrior named Elnir fell, defending the Infinity Circuit vaults. In his final breath, his bones crushed beneath the foot of a corrupted Wraith Knight. He sang not in words, but in the voiceless cry of a soul breaking under the weight of a world's loss. That scream echoed into the bedrock of the Craftworld. Days later, a blade formed in the ruins. A long, jagged piece of wraithbone, etched with no rune, singing with no tone. It hovered inches from the ground, unmoving, as if waiting. When a surviving seer attempted to lift it, the blade pulsed, not defensively indifferently. She could not move it. She could not name it. But 3 years later, on the eve of an unexpected incursion by Drukhari raiders, it appeared at her side, floating silently. She fought with it as if she had trained for years. It parried without her thought. It cut before her command. When the battle ended, she turned and the blade was gone. No one summoned it. Ghost blades do not obey. They arrive, often in moments too narrow for prayer, too urgent for logic. In some cases, they appear beside Eldar, who have never trained in bladecraft civilians. Artists, wanderers who find their hands already moving with alien instinct, guided by a force that does not explain. Afterward, when breath returns and enemies lie broken, the bearer looks down and sees only air. The blade does not remain. It is not a weapon to own. It is a sentence, spoken when needed. Not all who encounter such blades survive. Some are found dead, untouched by blade or bolt, with hands stretched out toward something not there. Spirit seers call it resonance, dissonance and incompatibility between soul tone and artifact. Others call it rejection. The blade had no use for them. Among the bonesingers, ghost blades are not spoken of in public, but in private. They share fragments, memories of forges that sang too loudly, of soul songs that shaped weapons before the ritual began, of constructs born already awake. One elder claimed he sang a blade while dreaming. Another said his arm moved without will, guided by a presence he could not name, and that when the blade solidified, he wept for reasons he could not remember. One such weapon, catalogued only as Shrike Pattern Null, has been witnessed on 3 separate Craftworlds without transit: Ibrasil, Samhan, Luganeth. Each time, it was seen for no more than an hour, always in combat, always in motion. The final confirmed sighting placed it in the void, floating in the wake of a dying frigate, surrounded by dead chaos, Astartes, spinning slowly, waiting. It had no hilt, no guard, only a sliver of curved light, trembling faintly with psychometric feedback. The farseer, who attempted to retrieve it, collapsed from neural seizure before her fingers touched the edge. Some whisper that these blades are fragments of dead Craftworlds, that when a Craftworld dies, not all its weapons perish, that some are cut loose, flung into the void with their maker's final song still burning inside, and when need arises, they return, not to reclaim legacy, but to fulfill it. The Asuriani do not claim to understand them. The Inari, however, speak of them differently. They claim the ghost blades are not weapons, but will the incarnate intent of those who refuse to die. They see them as gifts from Ennead, signs that death does not mean dormancy. In their rituals, ghost blades are not feared, but sought. Some Inari warriors wander the webway with empty sheaths, waiting. Perhaps the most chilling account comes not from the Eldar at all, but from a recovered Imperial Vox recording. A Deathwatch strike team boarding a crippled Eldar cruiser encountered a single humanoid 4-man Eldar youth, barely armored, surrounded by 30 dead Tau fire warriors. The survivor held no weapon, but the vid capture revealed flashes of light slicing through the air before each enemy fell. The blade was never visible, only the aftermath. The youth did not speak. When the Deathwatch approached, he raised empty hands, and then collapsed, bleeding from the eyes. Autopsy found no wound, only psychic scarring consistent with forced resonance overload. They buried him on a barren moon. Days later, the grave was empty, the dirt undisturbed, the sheath left behind open. Ghost blades do not speak in words, but their presence is a kind of language, one of grief, wrath, memory, refusal. They are not artifacts of glory. They are remnants of collapse, a memory so sharp it cuts, a purpose so potent it cannot fade. And when they arrive beside you, it means only one thing. Something has already begun to end. Long before before the crystalline harmony of psychoreactive constructs shaped by song, there was steel, crude by Eldar standards, heavy, resistant to psychic resonance, less fluid, less elegant, but necessary. In the age before the fall, before the cult Mechanicus ever lit its first forge, Eldar weaponsmiths worked in alloys so advanced they seemed alive. Some were, not in spirit, not in metaphor, but in agony. Bound not to infinity circuits, but to the raw, unfiltered lattice of emotion harvested at the edge of extinction. These were not Bonesinger works. These were the forges of the old courts lost to time, and perhaps mercy. The weapons still exist, not in museums, not on battlefields, but sealed beneath Craftworlds and vaults without doors, behind thought walls sealed by long-dead seer councils who feared what their ancestors had once called perfection. In these vaults, the steel does not rust. It sings dot. No one remembers the original name of the artifact, known only now as Elush's final breath. It was discovered deep within a forgotten archive chamber, beneath the secondary spire of Ibritzel, housed inside a stasis capsule that resisted both psychic and thermal penetration. When the lock finally broke by accident, not designed, the temperature in the chamber dropped by 13 degrees, despite no atmosphere being present. The weapon inside was simple in form, a long sword, etched with lines that refused to be read, glinting with a hue that changed depending on the viewer's emotion. Joy turned it violet, fear turned it green, grief made it black. The first Bonesinger who touched it lost her voice permanently. Her vocal cords were intact, but she could no longer sing. The resonance in her mind had been altered. She spoke only in monotone after that, incapable of modulating emotional cadence. The sword was returned to stasis. Eliosha's final breath is not unique. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of such weapons exist. They were forged in the centuries leading up to the fall, when Eldar society had reached its apex and its decay. During the Requiem era, it was fashionable among the cults of excess to commission weapons, not simply for war, but for expression. Swords that screamed with the emotion of the last victim, axes that echoed the laughter of the wielder's murdered rivals, rifles that fired not shuriken, but compressed frequencies of pain. These were not merely tools of death, they were instruments, and their wielders were conductors of cruelty. Some weapons were rumored to be symphonies in metal, each kill adding a note, each campaign a movement. Farseers speak of the elegiac lash, a coiled whip forged from an alloy lost to all known starforges, which could play the entire death song of an enemy species in a single strike. One Harlequin archive mentions a dagger, known as Truthwept, so tuned to psychic feedback that it could only stab lies. Its edge would vanish against a truthful heart. No such thing has been recovered intact. These artifacts are not kept in open halls. They are buried. The vaults are lined with nullstone. The corridors leading to them curve without logic, designed to disorient even a Farseer's steps. There are runes of forgetfulness etched into the walls, language engineered to misfire memory. The Eldar do not guard these places. They obscure them. Bonesingers are taught never to ask about them. Most obey. And yet, the weapons still sing. Not constantly, not in melody. But when the webway trembles, when the Craftworld's core shifts, when a great death occurs nearby, then the vaults resonate. A faint hum, a pressure in the mind, a feeling that something beneath the feet is remembering too clearly. One tale speaks of Shorel's resonance, a blaster-type weapon recovered by a Corsair prince who ignored all warnings. He claimed to hear poetry in its whine, claimed it improved his aim, claimed it spoke only in starlight. For 7 months, he won every duel, every raid, every skirmish. Then, in the middle of a parley with Drukhari exiles, he opened fire on his own crew. No survivors. His ship drifted into a star. Shorel's resonance was later found, completely unscathed, among the wreckage still warm, though it had been in the void for years. The issue is not merely that the weapons are haunted, it is that they are aware, or perhaps aware of being remembered. Memory itself seems to feed them. The more they are thought of, the more they surface. One Bonesinger theorized that the psychic resonance of the Eldar mind acts as a kind of Keith, that when enough minds recall a weapon, it begins to exist again, thought pulling steel from Sysis. Others argue that these weapons are not alive, but merely cursed by proximity to the fall, that they are not singing, but screaming, locked in loops of suffering too embedded to decay, that the reason no Bonesinger dares attempt restoration is not fear of failure, but fear of becoming part of the song. Perhaps the most terrifying suggestion is that the weapons do not need wielders, that they never did, that they are not tools, but instruments through which war expresses itself. Eldar culture no longer allows such beliefs, but in the dreams of Bonesingers, in the dark of the forge, when all is still, the notes remain, low, insistent, a song without end. There are no casual warriors among the Eldar, no draftees, no conscripts. To pick up a weapon is to surrender to it, to let it reshape not merely the hand, but the mind, the soul, the path. And no aspect of Eldar war better embodies this than the shrine-bound warriors of Aser. The aspect warriors do not simply don armor, they enter a state of being so complete, so consuming, that the line between self and weapon ceases to exist. The mask they wear is not concealment, it is the face of what they have become. A dire avenger is not trained to shoot, he is taught to become vengeance. The shuriken catapult is not issued, it is awaited. The moment it is gripped for the first time, the transformation begins. The gun is not separate from the warrior. It is a manifestation of the aspect itself, a physical echo of a psychic archetype that predates language. The armor locks into the spine. The mask lowers. The voice is quieted. All thought that is not war becomes static. What remains is purpose. Each shrine across the Craftworlds holds its own rites, its own calibration chants, its own resonance keys. No two Avenger catapults are alike. Though two outsiders, they seem identical. Each one is tuned, psychically and physically, to its bearer and to the path they walk. Even the reload diff, such a crude term can apply, is not mechanical. It is rhythm. Each shot is a stanza, each burst a refrain. Those who walk the path of the warrior know they cannot remain there forever. It is a truth spoken often, but what is less spoken, and more deeply feared, is how hard it is to return. The weapon does not leave the hand. The self leaves the mind. Warriors returning to civilian paths often find the imprint of the mask lingers. Reflexes shaped by years of movement, keyed to a weapon's weight, do not fade. Dreams come in bursts, rhythmic, staccato shuriken fire echoing through memory. A former howling banshee once confessed, beneath sedation, that she could no longer speak above a whisper. Her lungs tensed whenever she raised her voice, as if expecting it to become a scream blade shriek. She had not worn the mask in over 2 decades. This is not malfunction, it is design. The Aeldari do not build tools, they build extensions of self. The war gear of the aspect shrines is not crafted for function alone. It is crafted to embody. The scorpion's chainsword must hum not just with vibration, but with seeking. The fire dragon's fusion gun must radiate inevitability. The weapon is a sculpted echo of an idea older than death. To wield it is to surrender to that idea, to dissolve within it until nothing remains but function and form, identical. Shrine masters speak of moments when warriors do not feel the trigger pulled, only the consequence. The gun fires when the will aligns, not before, not by accident. This synchronicity borders on possession, but the Eldar do not see it as loss. They see it as discipline. The moment the mask is donned, the warrior vanishes, the aspect lives. The psychic feedback loops are subtle, but absolute. The mask records more than optics, it filters perception. Some warriors report feeling their own thoughts shift tonal registers once the helm seals. They no longer want to hesitate. They no longer think about risk. There is no command, only reaction, not in the manner of instinct, but in the manner of choreography, remembered from a past life. Those who fall in battle are often found with expressions locked in stillness, not terror, not rage, but certainty. The kind that comes from knowing the act of war was performed not out of choice, but out of essence. And yet, beneath the armor, beneath the repetition, there are always cracks. Moments when the warrior remembers who they once were, a phrase spoken in a voice no longer theirs, a gesture made from a hand that no longer trembles. It is in these moments that many leave the path, not out of cowardice, but because they fear vanishing entirely. A weaponsmith named Thurl once confessed to a bonesinger that his hands could no longer shape civilian tools. Every time he tried to sculpt a bowl, it became a blade. Every pattern bent toward sharpness. His fingers remembered the path too well. He walked into the Infinity Circuit 2 weeks later. His last work, a helm with no mask, and a catapult with no trigger, was left on the steps of an abandoned shrine. Even outside the shrines, the residue of the weapon remains. The Guardian Militia, less bound to archetype, still speak of the subtle pull of their rifles. That when cradled for too long, the rifle begins to listen, not in sound, but in presence. The Eldar do not fear this. They understand it, but they also mark the boundaries carefully. A weapon is not a friend. It is not a servant. It is a mirror, polished by war until it forgets what reflection meant. In this way, the aspect warriors become mythic, not through deeds, but through dissolution. They are not individuals. They are rituals in motion. The gun does not fire without the mask. The mask does not breathe without the path. And the path does not end, only changes form. Behind the gun, there is no face, only purpose. They call them trophies, spoils, artifacts taken in blood and catalogued in vaults that stink of incense and rust, in the halls of the Ordo Xenos and the cog-choked sanctums of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Eldar weapons are not feared, they are studied. Sealed behind adamantine shielding, bathed in stasis fields, reduced to quantities, diagrams, theories, but none of these safeguards matter. Because Eldar wargear does not forget, and it does not forgive. It begins quietly, a blade unearthed on a dead moon, still intact among ash and glass, a rifle pried from a corpse on a battlefield already silent, a gauntlet, inert, its runes dim but warm to the touch. The tech priests believe these are simply curiosities, advanced Xenos relics, yes, but ultimately they run OSPEC scans, radiometric tests, sacred rites of unbinding, and sometimes the weapons comply, for days, weeks, until they do not in one recorded instance. A Magos biologist named Lethrin dissected a filigreed shuriken pistol recovered from the wreckage of a Craftworld outpost. The weapon's construction defied categorization. Its internal chamber folded into itself, its psychic signature mutable, slippery. Lithron reported no unusual activity during the first 19 days. On the 20th, the cogitators in his laboratory began repeating one phrase across all screens. "I remember you." The pistol had not moved, not once. But Lethrin was found the next day with both eyes ruptured and his mechadendrites tangled into the shape of an unfamiliar rune. The pistol was gone. No breach was recorded. There is no known case of an Eldar weapon remaining inert in known Eldar hands indefinitely, even when handled with reverence. Even when sealed behind Geller-shielded containment, the weapons begin to ... behave. Some emit subharmonics that mimic breathing. Some vibrate in pulses synchronized with the handler's heartbeat until the rhythm shifts. Then the vibration stops. The handler often dies within days. Aneurysm, neural collapse, sudden organ liquefaction. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screams foul play. Just a silent, precise end. Those who wield the weapons directly soldiers, scavengers, fools fare worse. The Cadian sergeant once claimed a fallen Farseer's glaive during the Battle of Tarsis Reclaim. His squadmates reported that for the first hour, he laughed, not manically. He said he could hear music, that the blade hummed in tune with his thoughts, that it guided his strikes before he even thought to move. They believed him, at first, until he began calling them by names none of them recognized, until he began whispering in a dialect unknown to Imperial records. The blade was still in his hands when he walked into the middle of a Tyranid advance and dropped to his knees. He did not resist. He did not fight. He simply waited. His body was never recovered in Inquisitor Maudran, whose xenological vaults were the envy of Segmentum Obscurus, disappeared 2 years after acquiring a cache of recovered Eldar wargear. His notes grew erratic, frequent mention of echoes in the steel, of voices behind reflections. He ordered all servitors removed, sealed the chamber. The last entry in his data slate read, "They have mistaken me for the one who bled them. I cannot correct them." When the vault was opened, there was no body, only his rosette, scorched black. The wargear had vanished. The Eldar themselves do not speak of these incidents. When pressed, they respond only with stillness. Some whisper that the weapons carry psychic fingerprints, resonances so deep they bind intention, and others suggest the weapons are protected not by technology, but by ancestral memory. That each blade, each rifle, is a node in a web that stretches across the Craftworlds and through the Infinity Circuit. To touch one without lineage is not to steal. It is to intrude, and the intrusion is always corrected. The Harlequins tell a different story. They say the weapons remember every hand they have passed through, that when a foreigner grasps an Eldar blade, the blade reacts not to species, but to intention. If the bearer means to honor, it might sleep. If they mean to possess, it awakens. And if they mean to forget, the weapon will not allow it. Memory becomes a toxin. Images flood, names screams, entire deaths played backwards across the mind's eye. There are no confirmed examples of an Eldar mastering such a weapon. Those who attempt often report hallucinations, a battlefield not their own, a lover they never knew, a child whose death they cannot forget. The weapon does not show them their past. It buries them in someone else's, until the self buckles under the weight. The Mechanicus insists this is an anomaly of Xenos, psychic architecture Akos, trapped in psychoreactive material, a form of data imprinting, but no analysis explains why these effects intensify over time. Why the weapons seem to choose moments of clarity, of pain, why the deaths are always personal, among rogue traders. Tales spread of cursed relic Eldar blades that vanish when sold, then reappear beside the seller's bed, rifles that only fire when pointed at allies, helmets that whispered battle reports from wars that never happened. No transaction is ever worth the aftermath. Those who survive learn to leave such war gear buried, because the weapons do not belong, not to the Imperium, not to collectors, not to the curious. They belong to the song, to the hand that shaped them, to the dead who dreamed them into form. And when stolen, they do not scream. They remember. There is no death more feared among the Aeldari than the one that comes without preservation. To die without a spirit stone is to be claimed by she who thirsts, to feel the soul unravel, screaming as it is devoured. The soul stone is more than tradition. It is salvation, protection, continuation. It is the barrier between grief and obliteration. But war is seldom clean, and the void hungers. Sometimes, a warrior falls too far from sanctuary. Sometimes their spirit stone cracks beneath the weight of battle, shattered by force or time or entropy. Sometimes the stone is lost altogether, drifting into the cold between stars. And sometimes, when recovery comes too late, all that is found is dust. Tradition holds that such fragments be interred near the Craftworlds core, released back into the psycho-reactive lattice that houses the communal spirit, a ritual of mourning, a surrender of identity into the collective song. But not all bone singers obey tradition, and not all grief is willing to let go. In the darker corners of Eonden, in the shadow of wraith tombs and memory vaults, there exists a practice unspoken in official doctrine, a process where the splinters of broken spirit stones are harvested, refined not to rebuild the soul, but to embed its remnants within the weapon itself. The result is not resurrection. It is not peace. It is transmutation. The first recorded case was never truly recorded. It was whispered. A bone singer, who had lost 3 kin in the same battle, could not bear to let their stones drift away. The fragments were inert, too small to house consciousness, too jagged to bind, but she sang to them anyway, not to restore, but to use. And when the blade took form, it vibrated with something more than resonance. It pulsed, as if it had breath. The weapon fought as expected, clean lines, sharp edge, responsive reflex. But it would not be still. Even at rest, it hummed faintly. Those who passed near it reported a sensation in the spine, a cold pressure at the back of the mind. The blade moved too eagerly, too quickly. When it killed, it exhaled a sigh, not of metal, but of something trying to remember how to speak. The bone singer sealed it, but the technique had already escaped. Among those most scarred by war, those who had lost too much to the void, the idea took root. Why waste fragments? Why return them to silence when they could still fight, still matter? In the following decades, more weapons appeared, sharper than their shape, faster than their mass. All bore the same signature, a subtle tremor, an edge that flickered faintly in shadow, an eerie hum only audible when alone. These were not haunted blades. They were burdened, carrying the psychic ash of the dead. Shards of soul too damaged to retain memory, but still hot with emotion, rage, sorrow, guilt, need. It did not take long for the symptoms to show. Wielders reported increased aggression, faster reaction times, but less restraint. sleep disruptions, voices in the periphery of hearing familiar, but indistinct. One guardian claimed he saw his brother in the blade's reflection, mouth moving in silent fury. He was later found unconscious, bleeding from the wrists. The weapon buried beside him in the floor. Bonesingers began to debate. Some argued these effects were failures of harmonization, poor tuning between the weapon and its user. Others insisted the fragments were inherently unstable, incomplete souls leaking resonance into surrounding minds. A minority whispered that the blades were not flawed, they were honest, and that the madness was not an infection, but a message. The reforge was outlawed shortly thereafter. But nothing dies among the Eldar, not truly. The techniques persisted, passed in low song, taught without admission. War pressed on. Death increased. And for some, the line between remembrance and weaponry blurred beyond recognition. Among the Aeldari, the practice is viewed differently. They believe death is a bridge, not an end. To embed fragments in a blade is not desecration, but continuation. One Inari wraithlard bears a glaive, entirely forged from powdered spirit stones, held together with alloyed wraithbone, and sealed with a ritual that turns grief into fuel. Each time it strikes, it sings not in voice, but in vision. Those who stand too near during battle report flashes of other places, other times. A battlefield they never knew, a farewell never spoken. Not all such weapons remain stable. Some vibrate themselves apart. Others become inert without warning. A few go quiet for centuries, then reignite in the presence of a particular bloodline or memory. The soul does not die. It lingers, and when fragmented, it becomes sharp. The seer councils remain divided. Some demand total destruction of reforged weapons. Others keep them sealed in vaults, catalogued but untouched. But the real truth lies in silence, in the fact that more of these blades appear with every decade, quietly, efficiently, as if answering a need to, deep to name. There is a phrase etched into the haft of one such weapon, recovered from the ruins of a downed Eldar vessel in the Maelstrom. I am not what remains, I am what refuses to fade. The words were not carved. They were grown, shaped by the wraithbone as it formed. What happens when a warrior dies without a soul stone? Sometimes, nothing. But sometimes, the blade they left behind remembers. It began with a pulse, not seismic, not a ripple through Bilton's infinity. Circuit that lasted less than a breath, but echoed like thunder through the minds of every spirit seer within 10 kilometers. No alarms sounded, no clacks, no activation codes or command protocols were issued. And yet, deep within the Jade Spire district, Vault Armory Kyverin opened. It did not unlock. It unfolded. Doors sealed for over a century split apart along invisible seams, unfolding like petals in reverse. No one was present to witness the beginning. But by the time the seer-tuned monitoring runes lit up, the vault was already active. Spirit stones embedded in the walls glowed with coordinated rhythm. Racks of rifles and blades, armor plates and grav boost packs, all began to hum not with energy, but with presence. The armory was not reacting to command, it was deciding. The war of wraiths had been grinding for months by then. Bealtan's wraith constructs had borne the brunt of attrition and unsustainable bleed of soul-bound machinery. Against the relentless, seething advance of corrupted automatons from a heretical forge world now lost to the warp. Communications flickered, command networks faltered, and Bealtan's warrior caste found itself outpaced, outflanked, and outnumbered. Farsia's debated evacuation. Bonesingers fell into silence. Even the Avatar's chamber stood dormant, but the Craftworld itself stirred. Vault Kyverin was never meant to open without command. It had no automated systems, no AI, no machine spirit in the crude sense of the Mon Key. What it had was memory, thousands of years of resonance, layered into every slab of psychoreactive wraithbone, attuned to generations of guardians who had marched out of its threshold and never returned. The weapons were not simply stored there. They knew where they were, and they knew when they were needed. First came the rifles. 18 pairs lifted from their racks and hovered, inert but upright, drifting like leaves through zero gravity as if carried by breath. They did not collide. They formed rank. Behind them, grav plates activated, boots aligned. Armor sealed itself, helmets forming last, each mask locking into place with no occupant beneath. Then the wraithbone flared. Softly, like a heartbeat in fog, spirit stones embedded within the chests of the armor began to shimmer. Not violently, not unnaturally, with consent, the way a name is spoken across time. Some glowed faintly. Others flared and did not dim. When the first wraith form stepped out of the vault, there was no ceremony, no order given. It simply moved. The other suits followed, each filled with resonance. Not complete souls but fragments. Echoes, the kind of psychic residue that accumulates in places too steeped in memory to decay. Not enough for identity, just enough for will. Witnesses reported seeing the formation walk through the corridors of the Jade Spire without pause, not sprinting, not reacting, flowing, like instinct made manifest. Doors opened. Before them, lifts adjusted. The craft world moved to accommodate them not as infrastructure, but as partner. By the time they reached the outer ramparts near the breach site at the Altar of Thorns, the defense lines had collapsed. Drukarian corrupted constructs surged through broken halls, carving through living guardians with surgical precision. No reinforcement was expected. No strategy remained. Then the vault-formed guardians arrived. They did not speak. They did not coordinate. They fired as one. Every rifle discharged in synchronicity. Every movement mirrored. They did not bleed. When a limb was lost, the grave mesh compensated. When a chest was breached, the spirit stone flared once and the armor kept moving. It was not victory, but it was enough. Enough to stall the breach. Enough to rally what remained of Bealton's living defenders. Enough for the spirit seers to bring the avatar to waking heat. Enough to push back. The formation dissolved 6 hours later. Weapons returned to the vault. Armor slotted itself back into place. Not one suit remained active, but all remained whole. No code had triggered them. No song had summoned them. No bonesinger dared take credit. Afterward, the Seer Council debated at length. Some claimed Craftworld Bealton had begun to exhibit self-regulating defense behaviors, suggesting a form of emergent intelligence within the Infinity Circuit. Others argued the event was a consequence of subconscious psychic pressure, residual soul patterns within the vault, responding to the threshold of annihilation. A few, the most heretical by Bealton standards, suggested that the weapons themselves remembered, that every rifle had once belonged to someone who had not forgotten how to aim. Vault Kavaran was resealed, not out of fear, out of respect. The weapons inside have remained silent ever since, but sometimes, when war draws too close, the air around the vault grows tense. Footsteps echo louder, lights flicker slightly off rhythm, and in the stillness, a single helmet turns on its shelf, not from motion, from attention. The craft world is not alive, not in the way flesh understands, but it remembers. And sometimes, when war asks a question to grave for orders to answer, it opens a door, not because it was told, because it knew. There is no forge like the void, no rule, no choir, no witness. Out among the dead stars and shattered moons, where the craft worlds dare not linger. The Corsairs thrive not in empire, not in prophecy, but in hunger. They are fragments of what was noble, twisted by freedom into something stranger. Warriors, poets, murderers, princes, and thieves. And they craft their war gear, not with the reverence of bone singers or the structure of aspect shrines, but with the raw desperation of survival layered in madness. Corsair weaponry does not adhere to any doctrine. It is born of what is at hand. spliced wraithbone taken from fallen kin, shards of spirit stone pried from ruined temples, cannibalized components stripped from human manufactorums, Drukhari raids, and Mechanicus husks. A corsair's blade may hum with stolen resonance one day and bleed rust the next. They wield fusion pistols shaped like flutes, rifles bound with wire and dripping with sigils, swords that curve along no rational axis and sometimes refuse to reflect light, beauty and horror dancing in imbalance. The design philosophy, if such a term can apply, is one of assertion. These are not weapons made for harmony. They are made to declare. Each one is an extension of the Corsair's defiance against order, against Craftworld law, against their own inevitable extinction. To wield such a weapon is to state, I refuse the quiet death. I refuse the shrine. I refuse the path. The Void Seer, Ilveron, of the Pale Fangs, once wielded a rifle that screamed when fired, not in sound, but in thought, projecting terror into the minds of all who saw the shot strike. The weapon had no visible firing mechanism. It pulsed. Its ammunition was unknown. When it was taken from his corpse by a rival Corsair prince, it melted through his gauntlet in seconds and vanished into the void. Some claim it was never a weapon at all, but a bound demon from the edges of the webway. Convinced it was a gun. Another warband, the Shard Vultures, is infamous for carrying blades tipped with concentrated soulpalin, harvested from Inari cult sex substances that blur the line between drug and spirit tech. These swords cut not only flesh, but memory. A single wound can erase a name, a face, an entire history from the minds of those nearby. Whether the wielder controls this effect or is merely another victim remains unknown. Corsair weapons are unstable, not because they are poorly made, but because they are not meant to endure. Each one is singular, a statement in violence. The creators are artists, yes, but artists in exile, untethered from tradition, drunk on choice. They bleed color into form, fragment song into shape, and sometimes the result is something unclassifiable. Recovered piece from a skirmish near the Halo Stars was catalogued by a Craftworld archivist as technically alive. A blade that breathed through vented holes along its length, sighing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the wielder. It sharpened itself during combat, growing thinner and more precise with each cut, until it became too fine to see. It vanished hours after being stored. The vault walls remain intact, but the archivist now speaks only in low tones, claiming to dream in fractal geometry. His hands tremble when near wraith. No diagnosis has been offered. Corsair wargear also carries a kind of contagion, not biological, but philosophical. Warriors who come into prolonged contact with such weapons often begin to deviate. Training rituals dissolve. Meditation fails. Memories fracture and reform with unfamiliar edges. One Bealton squad was exposed to a Corsair-modified Shrieker cannon during a joint operation. Within days, 2 of them began altering their own armor, carving unknown runes, crafting mechanical components without sanction. They were removed, reassigned to distant postings. One later vanished into the webway. The other joined a wandering Inari sect and has not been seen since. To the Corsairs, this is not corruption. It is evolution. They do not fear the edge of madness. They see it as the price of remaining free. Where Craftworlders see chaos, Corsairs see possibility. Where seers speak of the doom of Eldanesh, Corsairs laugh, then build a plasma whip from a fractured Wraithblart core and go dancing across the void. Their wargear carries the scent of something ancient and unshackled, not heretical, not blasphemous, but uninhibited, that which the Craftworlds sealed away. The Corsairs drink deep. Their weapons reflect that, shaped by instinct, accident, or vision. Blades that hum lullabies to dying stars. Pistols that fire screams instead of projectiles. Helms that show the wearer not their target, but their target's regrets. And yet, among all this madness, A kind of genius persists. Corsair weapons work. They kill, they wound, they terrify. They remind the galaxy that the Eldar are not a single path, not a frozen race bound in dogma. They are multiplicity. They are shatter fragments of a fallen empire, each shard sharper than memory. And among them, the Corsairs laugh loudest. They do not build for glory. They do not build for legacy. They build to survive the next hour. And in that hour, their weapons shine brightest. They say he laughs because it hurts less than screaming. Sigurach, the laughing god, the last deity, unconsumed by she who thirsts, dances across reality with a grin wide enough to fracture prophecy. His children, the Harlequins, wear masks not to conceal, but to reveal echoes of truth, to unbearable in raw form. And among their relics, whispered between performances and painted into murals, never repeated, is mention of a weapon with no true name. A knife, perhaps, or a shard of paradox, or a thought so sharp it cuts the world. The laughing god's knife is not catalogued. No Craftworld archives admit its existence. No Harlequin ever speaks of it directly. It appears only in anecdote, in theatrical fragments. In the margins of the Codex Imperialis, scrawled in ink that shifts under light, it is never shown, never drawn on stage. But the motif repeats. A figure laughs, a shadow stirs, and a weapon shaped like nothing known finds its way into the story. It is not always a blade. Sometimes it is a joke, sometimes a question. Once, a smile carved into a mirror, but always, it kills and not in the way ordinary weapons do. The most cited account comes from a performance on the dead world of Surthan-Kai, attended only by Harlequins and ghosts. The mask was never recorded. The script was written in smoke, but those who saw it reported that halfway through the act, during a retelling of the fall itself, the Shadow Seer paused, turned to an empty chair in the audience, and said, "You're early." Then she drew something that no one could remember afterward, and a scream was heard not from her, not from the stage, but from the ground. The dirt split. A tear opened across the air, and for 3 heartbeats, every Eldar present saw how they would die. Some wept, some laughed, none moved. When the play resumed, the tear was gone. No memory of what had been cut remained. The knife, if it exists, is not a weapon in the physical sense. It does not cleave flesh or break armor. It does not bleed. What it does is more insidious. It alters meaning. It severs outcomes. It slices cause from effect. Those struck by it do not fall. They vanish from history, from memory, from certainty itself. Their absence becomes an unspoken riddle, a cough no longer followed by silence, a name no one is sure they ever said. To wield such a weapon is not to kill, it is to edit. Some suggest the knife is not a singular object, but a performance. A moment enacted so precisely that it collapses the boundaries of reality, that when a Harlequin moves with perfect timing, perfect rhythm, perfect expression, the universe cannot help but obey. The weapon then is not drawn. It happens. The mask of twisted echoes is most frequently associated with such anomalies. Their shadow seer is never seen twice in the same mask. Their solitaires dance with shadows that cast no source. Witnesses from distant campaigns report moments where a Harlequin appeared in the middle of a battlefield, smiled, twirled once. An entire squad simply forgot why they had raised their weapons. When the memory returned, the Harlequin was gone, and so were 3 seconds of time. One Inquisitor's report filed this as temporal bleed trauma induced by mimetic warfare. But the footnotes include a curious annotation, ... And then the jester winked at me, though I'm unsure I had eyes at the time. There are darker accounts. The knife appearing to those not aligned with the Harlequins at all. A Drukari Archon who captured a Harlequin troop leader, only to find herself trapped in a performance she could not escape. Each day began the same. Each interrogation ended with the captive offering her the knife with a grin. She never touched it, but by the 7th cycle, her homunculus reported she had begun reciting her own childhood, memories in iambic verse, and requesting audience seating for the prisoners. The Harlequin vanished soon after, leaving behind only a glove and a smear of ink that spelled finale. No reliable image of the knife exists. Descriptions vary. Some say it is curved, others flat, some insist it is not seen at all, only felt like a realization too late. The most agreed upon sensation is the chill before its use, a sudden dissonance in perception, as if something essential is about to be forgotten. Among the when asked directly, they only smile. What is the knife? A punchline sharp enough to bleed. Can it be stopped? Only if the story ends first. Who forged it? The question forged the answer. Have you used it? You're still asking, aren't you? Speculation within the Craftworlds varies. Some farseers believe the knife is Sigarach's final gift and escape hatch, buried within narrative causality itself, meant to be used only when the last laugh must echo across a dying star. Others believe it is a myth, a caution against the unrestrained power of story. Warning that even lies, told perfectly, become true. A few among the Aeldari suggest it is real, but not a blade at all, rather, a symbol, an invitation to become part of the dance. To bleed belief into the void so deeply that death itself flinches. The laughing god's knife may not exist, but the harlequins perform as if it does, and the galaxy, more often than not, accommodates them. Every now and then, a wound appears where no strike was seen. A memory fades where no trauma occurred. A commander falls, and no one recalls their name, only that something changed when the laughter stopped. It is not fear that surrounds the myth, it is anticipation. No one remembers its original name. Names die in the dark city. They are peeled away, traded, devoured. What remains is whispered only as a warning, the blade that waits. It is not housed in a trophy case. It is not mounted on display, nor locked in vaults, layered with labyrinthine traps. It rests, inert, in the deepest hollow of Comora's bleeding chamber, a pit of unclaimed relics considered too dangerous, too cursed, or too patient to destroy. The blade was not made in the dark city. It was forged on a craftworld long lost to memory, perhaps even before the fall. Its wraithbone was black, before the blood-soaked Eton obsidian hue with no reflection, drinking light rather than bending it. Its edge curves in a spiral, not geometrically possible, a Mobius thought in steel, and yet it hums. Low, like breath exhaled underwater, like a voice you remember from a dream you never had. It came to Comora as a gift, or perhaps a challenge. A dead harlequin troop delivered it to an archon, whose name has since been erased from every vault, every slave, every tongue. Not killed, removed, as if unworthy of memory. The harlequins did not speak. They only danced, left the blade upon the throne, and vanished. The archon tried to wield it. Of course he did. All archons believe they are singular, that rules are written for others. He held the blade for 3 heartbeats. His expression never changed. His mind ruptured. His body withered. What remained crumbled into dust. That should have been the end of it. But it did not stop there. Over the cycles, homunculi have attempted to study it, believing no construct could outlast their cruelty. But the blade does not scream. It does not bleed. It simply refuses. Scalpels snap. Scanners fail. Drones vanish. One Coven's underchirurgeon whispered that the weapon sees backward, and that to touch it is to feel your past corrected. That your worst memory shifts. That something you once did in shame now ends in blood. The blade has not moved since, but it is never found in the same place. Sometimes it is on the pedestal in the bleeding chamber's center. Sometimes it rests across the lap of a statue of the Muse of Lies. Once, it appeared in a gladiator's throat without ever being drawn. There were no marks, no entry wound, only the hilt protruding like an idea too sharp to be denied. The weapon is not Drukhari. It is not even Eldar in the way the living understand. It radiates something colder than shadow, something still and unspeaking. Those few scholars of the Aeldari who have studied captured imagery claim the blade responds not to touch, but to grief, that it pulses faintly in proximity to those whose sorrow has calcified into purpose, that the blade is not alive but that something in it listens, not actively, not with hunger, with attention, and the attention, they say, is not cigarettas. There is a belief dangerous even to utter that the blade contains a fragment of Enid's gaze, not the god itself, nor even a piece of its power, just an awareness, a sliver, as if when the god of the dead stirred in the infinity circuit, something blinked, and the blade was made in the space of that blink, not created, not crafted, just there. No Archon dares touch it now. It remains in Camorra, not out of possession, but avoidance. A totem of what cannot be undone. A scar? The cult of red knives makes pilgrimage to it, offering sacrifices of silence, their tongues removed, their deaths unrecorded. The Haemonculi do not interfere. They watch. The Harlequins have never returned. In the few moments when seers speak of it, they do so behind triple wards, behind veils of deliberate misdirection. They speak of weapons that choose, weapons that end. The blade in Camorra is neither. It does not choose. It does not end. It waits. And those who come close enough feel it not in fear, but in inevitability, as if one day, when the song of the galaxy has played long enough, it will rise, and someone will finally be what it was waiting for. The staff of a warlock is not an object. It is not forged, nor built, nor selected from racks lined with interchangeable weapons. It is grown pulled from the skeins of prophecy like a single thread tugged from a tapestry none can see in full. The process is intimate, private, a ritual conducted in silence and trance, guided not by tradition, but by inevitability. The warlock does not choose the shape reveals itself. What emerges is not a staff, it is an anchor, a lens, a wound. Each warlock who walks the path carries a different design. Some staves are jagged, twisting, scorched black, as if already touched by fire yet to come. Others shimmer in translucent curves, almost elegant, deceptive in their clarity. All hum with suppressed weight. The beam they fire is not energy, in the crude sense understood by the Imperium. It is future, compressed and released. Possibility calcified into force. Each strike alters not only the present, but the line of what might follow. When a warlock raises the staff, they are not aiming, they are deciding. The target is not chosen by calculation. It is revealed by resonance, the sharp alignment of will, fear, and the echo of what must occur. The beam does not follow trajectory. It follows intent. Those who survive describe it not as being struck, but erased as if a version of themselves had been peeled away, leaving only a remainder. But this precision comes at a cost. The psychic feedback loop between warlock and staff is not stable. Each time the beam is loosed, it echoes backward, not just through neurons, but through memory and dream. The warlock sees flickers of what might have happened had they hesitated, of what the enemy would have done if spared, of a future they just unmade. These visions are not metaphor, they are as vivid as touch. Some warlocks learn to ignore them, others flinch with every strike, a few come to crave them. The staff is not passive, it watches, not through eyes, but through emotional imprint. It remembers every use, every hesitation, every moment of fear, and it begins to respond accordingly. A warlock who grows overconfident may find the beam weaker, misaligned. A warlock who doubts may find it amplified beyond their intention. Some interpret this as punishment, others as teaching. The more powerful the warlock, the stranger the staff becomes. Wraithbone bends under prophetic pressure, warping into forms no artisan would craft. Runes appear along the shaft, unbidden, some of protection, some of warning. One warlock of Althwa bore a staff so heavy with prescient mass that it had to be carried by a wraith servant when not in use. Its tip bled, a constant trickle of light, which evaporated before it struck the ground. He claimed it whispered the names of those who would die each time he lifted it. No one challenged him. When he vanished during a failed raid against Chaos-corrupted guard, the staff returned alone. The names continued for 3 days, then silence. The Craftworlds do not regulate staff creation. No two rituals are alike. Some warlocks disappear into meditative isolation for weeks, emerging with their staff already in hand. Others build them in pieces over years, each part grown in a different location, harvested from the echoes of ancient battlefields or shaped in orbit around dying stars. The material is always wraithbone but altered, tainted not in corruption, but in uniqueness, a psychic fingerprint etched into the grain, impossible to replicate. It is said that the staff is both mirror and blade. When used to channel power, it reflects not just force, but reason. An Eldar who unleashes a blast of psychic flame does so knowing why, and the staff remembers that reason. When the same motion is repeated without necessity, the flame dims. The weapon is not a slave to the hand. It is a partner bound in paradox, obedient only to fate. The Aeldari warlocks complicate the matter further. Their staves shift mid-combat. Length, weight, even curvature can change based on the psychic winds of death nearby. One was seen wielding a staff that fractured into 3 strands of glowing wire during battle, only to reform with a snap of his fingers when the final foe fell. The Mechanikists tried to replicate this effect. Their prototype exploded, killing 11. The cause was listed as intent mismatch. A warlock's staff can outlive them, but it rarely does so quietly. In the aftermath of its bearer's death, it often remains inert for a time, then begins to act. Some staves have fired unprovoked, striking down targets in the middle of deep. Others have vanished, slipping through walls, or simply not being where they were placed. One was found embedded in a World Eater's chest, with no record of its transit across sectors. When removed, the corpse crumbled to dust. Spirit seers claim the staves seek not vengeance, not glory, continuation. A fragment of the warlock's vision remains trapped inside, echoing until it finds a path to complete itself. Not reincarnation, not resurrection, a need. And so, each staff is feared, even by those who understand it. It is a tool of power, yes, but also of prophecy. It does not obey whim, it obeys outcome. The warlock shapes it, feeds it, trusts it, and in return, the staff holds them to account. Because in Eldar war, power is not measured in how loudly one can strike, but in how clearly one can see the price. They are not passed down, not stored, not replicated. These are not relics by intent, they are accidents of will, of resonance, too stubborn to collapse. Among the Craftworlds, they are spoken of in phrases more akin to funeral rites than to history. Blades that return without being summoned, rifles that refuse to degrade, armor that fits a new bearer, as if remembering the old one. The bones that refuse to break. The phenomenon has no formal name, though, in the oldest archives of Samhan, there is a glyph, rarely used, that translates loosely to that which does not forget its shape. These weapons are not bonded to bloodlines or sanctified shrines. They do not choose based on lineage. They appear, always at a moment when ruin seems assured, when the last line is drawn and no reinforcements remain, and their arrival is never. Gentle. The first known record dates back to the Exodus vaults of Altansur. Before its descent into the warp, a guardian named Thite carried a spear of split wraithbone, with a shaft carved in spiral arcs that sang during windstorms. He fell, holding the gate against a tide of corrupted Mon-Ki, buying time for a retreat that would doom him. His body was never recovered. The gate was overrun. 2 centuries later, During an unrelated engagement on Wineloak, a trainee collapsed in a trance. When his squad approached, they found a spear buried beside him, identical in construction, untouched by time, still humming with that same mournful cadence. He had never trained with palams, but when raiders struck days later, he wielded it without flaw, and when the battle ended, the spear was gone, left no impression in the soil, no heat signature, nothing but silence. The stories accumulate. A sword glimpsed in the arms of a wraithguard for a single battle, never before or after. A pistol once held by a fire dragon who died sealing a webway breach, found years later floating at the edge of a black hole, unscathed. A helm that appears always one size too large if waiting for the original head to return. These are not weapons built for immortality. They are not preserved by technology, nor archived by bone. Many were simple tools, without ornate filigree or sacred rune. What sets them apart is refusal. Refusal to be forgotten. Refusal to yield. Refusal to let the war end simply because the hand that held them no longer moves. Some believe they carry fragments of their bearers. Not full souls, those belong to the infinity circuit, or are lost to the great enemy, but something smaller. A final breath, maybe. A scream. A last moment of intent burned so deep into the weapon's pattern that it cannot dissipate. When danger echoes that shape, the weapon answers. Not all Craftworlds treat them with reverence. Built-in considers them omens of unfinished business, of weakness not properly buried. To wield such a weapon is to risk contamination of will. The warrior might not be carrying the weapon. The weapon might be carrying the warrior. Oath treats them with ceremony. When one appears, it is never spoken of aloud. The farseers nod. The spirit's heirs gather. The name of the last known wielder is sung into the wind, and the new bearer is never asked where it came from, only whether they are ready to carry it again. One of the most persistent legends surrounds a chain blade known as Severance. It has no confirmed shape descriptions, vary wildly. Sometimes it is curved, sometimes angular, sometimes jagged. What remains consistent is its sound, a low droning thrum, like a dirge sung under breath. It appears always on the third day of battle, always to the most wounded, always just before something impossible occurs, a stand that should not have held, a strike that should not have landed, a death that refuses to arrive. Afterward, it fades, not vanishes, fades like breath, condensing on glass, then gone. Skeptics among the bonesingers argue these tales are just that, stories born of fear and desperation. That war breeds hallucination. That resonance lingers in ways misunderstood, and weapons retrieved under duress take on meanings they do not truly contain. But those same bonesingers often sing longer to cleanse a vault where such a weapon was kept. Their notes falter. They do not speak of why. The weapons never speak, of course, but they are not silent. They vibrate at frequencies only the attuned can hear. Their surfaces grow warm when no sun touches them. Their weight shifts according to context, as though remembering a past strike and adjusting. One fireseer who dared to channel through one such blade found his precognition disrupted, not erased, but interrupted by memories not his own. Battles he had never fought. Wounds he had never taken. Words whispered in languages long dead. Not all who receive these weapons survive. Some reject the resonance. Others collapse under it. A few vanish entirely, taking the weapon with them. None are punished. None are mourned. The war moves on, and when it must, so do the weapons. There are those who believe these artifacts are not bound by physics, but by narrative. That the Eldar song is not just a cultural metaphor, but a structure. And when certain notes are struck, certain griefs, certain sacrifices, the song summons what it once knew, not as magic, not as fate, but as memories strong enough to shape matter. These are the bones that refuse to break, not because they were stronger, but because the story wasn't finished. In a culture where thought shapes weapon, and memory forges more keenly than fire. There are creations that defy solitude. Among the Eldar so fractured, so singular in their paths, there remain traces of unity too deep to separate. Not formations, not squads, pairs, and among those, a rarer still phenomenon, weapons that do not function alone. The first known instance was not recorded, but painted. A mural in the Hall of Silent Saints on Ibrasil depicts two figures, not aspect warriors, not seers, but twins, genderless in form, aglow with a shared halo of fractured wraithlight. Between them, a single blade arcs not passed from one to the other, but suspended, held in balance by neither hand. The rune beneath it translates poorly. Where I fall, you rise. The accompanying records are vague, lost to time, but the image recurs across cultures' variations of lovers who never part, siblings who never stray, warriors whose deaths never echo singly. The weapon forged by such pairs is never crafted in isolation. It is sung into existence by two voices, woven in harmonic resonance that no single bone singer can reproduce. The act is not merely ritual, it is a binding. Each participant offers not just emotion or memory, but synchronicity, their pulse, their breath, their death. The resulting weapon is not dual, it is singular, but it carries both. Not just fragments, entire souls, layered in parallel like reflections on glass. Some are forged by twins who serve in tandem, one wielding, the other lending will through psychic tether. In combat, the blade reacts with impossible fluidity. It anticipates, redirects, sings in tones that match only when both minds remain aligned. One thinks forward, the other behind. One blocks, one strikes. Together, the weapon becomes a conversation with no pause. But war rarely spares both. When one bearer dies, the weapon shifts. It does not fail. It mourns. Some become heavier, some dull. Some begin to vibrate with unpredictable intervals, like sobs disguised as song. Others refuse to be lifted at all, the psychic bonding so deeply ingrained that no replacement can echo the missing resonance. In rare cases, the surviving bearer continues alone, but the blade answers, as if the second voice remains, not with memory, with presence. One such example, known in private Althwa scrolls as Shroud Veil, was wielded by a bonded pair who served together for 77 years across 3 campaigns. When the second was lost to warpfire during a failed retreat, the blade fell inert for weeks. Then, during a subsequent ambush, it reawakened, flaring brighter than before, reshaping itself mid-combat into a narrower, serrated edge not seen in its original form. The survivor claimed she heard her siblings' laughter in the hum. The blade struck through 6 enemies in one motion. After the battle, she wept not for the dead, but because the sword was warm and had always been cold. Some say the soul of the departed is absorbed into the blade. Others argue the bond, once broken in flesh, simply finds home in steel. Either way, the result is consistent. The weapon lives on, carrying not just the skill, but the love, the rage, the unfinished sentence of the one lost. And when held again by the survivor, the weapon remembers. Not all such blades are meant for war. A few are ceremonial gifts forged between lovers at the dawn of the path, sealed in joy, never meant to strike. But when violence comes, and it always does, they cut cleaner than any shrine-born relic. Their lines are graceful, their glow gentle, but their weight, unbearable. Because to wield one is to carry the silence of the absent. There are tales of such weapons reappearing generations later. A blade, locked in a vault, hums louder when descendants pass. A sword inert for 500 years bursts into flame the moment 2 strangers cross eyes on a battlefield, as if recognizing something the bearers have yet to learn. Some see this as fate, others as a song still unfolding. The Harlequins claim that such weapons are the echoes of performances not yet completed, that when two souls promise to remain intertwined, their story refuses to end with death. The blade becomes a stage, the wielder, an actor repeating their lines until the other returns, or until the curtain falls. There are tragedies, always. One recorded case involved a blade that reversed its polarity mid-battle, striking not the enemy, but its bearer, severing the hand that held it. The analysis revealed a psychic fracture. The remaining soul within the weapon had rejected its partner. The reason was never discovered. The blade vanished days later. Some say it shattered. Others claim it simply walked away. To the bone singers, these weapons are anomalies. They cannot be replicated. They are grown only once, in a moment of mutual trust, so pure, so singular, that it defies structure. Attempts to recreate the resonance artificially have failed. The dual harmonic either collapses or cancels itself out. Only true alignment births the twins in the blade. Not all of them are sharp. One is said to be a spear that sings a lullaby when held. Another, a dagger that refuses to kill unless the wielder remembers their partner's voice. Another, a crystal shard that reshapes its edge depending on whether the bearer is grieving or enraged. Each reflects not warfare, but relationship. And in this, they are perhaps the most Eldar of all weapons, not tools, not machines, but expressions of soul, unfinished and enduring. One blade waits still, embedded in the wall of a Craftworlds outer hull. No one can remove it. No one can even touch it. It hums only when the stars align, a certain way in alignment that will not recur for another 80 cycles. It is said that, on that day, the other half will arrive, and the sword will be whole again. It is not a myth because it is impossible. It is a myth because it is remembered too clearly. In the forgotten vault songs of ancient Craftworlds, those half-chanted fragments that even bone singers do not fully understand, there are references to a device never drawn, never described, but always referred to in the same breathless phrasing. The whisper engine. Not a weapon in the traditional sense. Not a beam. Not a blade. A presence. A tone. Something that does not kill by impact or incision, but by invitation. The earliest mention comes from a dream record, extracted from a dying warlock's mind at the threshold of his integration into the infinity circuit. His final vision was of a chamber filled with motionless bodies, not burned. Their expressions were calm, serene, every weapon still holstered, no sign of struggle. He claimed they had agreed to end. When pressed on what had killed them, he whispered a single word before merging, listened. Theories among the spirit seers and the psychic artisans of the warcast vary wildly. The most disciplined of them suggest it was a psychoactic constructed device, tuned to generate frequencies that resonate not with flesh, but with conviction, a tone that bypasses cognition, sliding under memory and ideology to speak directly to obedience. Not mind control, not compulsion, just ... clarity. A moment where death seems correct, necessary, even merciful. There are reports always disavowed of experimental constructs, shaped during the last days, before the fall. Sonic matrices interlaced with proto-spirit stone resonance, grown not in forges but in the emotion chambers of what would later become the homunculi's first torture vaults. These weapons did not scream, they offered. They suggested cessation as a kindness, and those who heard them complied. It is said the whisper engine does not have a trigger. It has an audience. One recovered fragment, unearthed in the debris of a long-evacuated Eldar colony orbiting a dead moon, resembled no known war gear. A small spiral of fused wraithbone and crystal. It emitted no power signature, no vibration, but every data slate brought within 10 meters suffered partial memory wipes only of combat records. Words such as engage, retreat, threat, and fire were systematically blanked. Spoken directives issued near the object grew slower, less assertive. The retrieval team began referring to each other not by name, but by past tense memories. The one who stood, the one who once commanded. The object was sealed and lost in transit. No trace remains in Imperial logs. Among the Harlequins, the Whisper Engine is sometimes treated as metaphor and allegory for the dangers of persuasion, the weaponization of belief. But there are performances, rare and never repeated, where a character appears dressed not as a warrior or demon, but as silence incarnate. They carry no prop, they speak only once, and when they do, the entire audience flinches. Afterwards, attendees report dreams not of violence, but of compliance, as if a single word, long forgotten, had reminded them that surrender is not always failure. It is sometimes truth. Craftworld scholars, those brave or foolish enough to inquire, have scoured vaults for blueprints, audio captures, psychic signatures. None are complete. None agree. One schematic, preserved in the vaults of Ilkath, describes a sonic construct whose harmonics bend not around matter, but around intent. Its activation requires a bearer with complete emotional certainty. No fear, no doubt, no hope, just stillness. The schematic ends mid-word, overwritten by a blank page bearing a single line. Do not finish the song. The legend of the Ghostsmith is older than belief. It is never spoken in full, never written in one place, but the fragments surface in lullabies sung to Warfins in the sighs of exhausted bone singers, in the last rites of guardians who do not expect to survive the night. A figure not seen, not summoned, not prayed to. A craftsman who builds only when the song is about to end. A presence that does not announce itself, but leaves gifts in the dark. Some call it an echo, others a myth. The Harlequins tell it like a joke with no punchline. He forged the blade before the war began. He was just waiting for you to catch up. The spirit seers do not laugh. They speak of weapons found embedded in the hulls of retreating ships, placed where shielding had failed, of rifles discovered beside unconscious warriors, the stock still warm, the spirit stone in tune with the bearer's rhythm. No records exist of the weapons being crafted. No bone singer claims them. When analyzed, the resonance signatures carry patterns unknown to any current artisan. One particularly disputed incident occurred during the fourth siege of Ulthwest's outer rings. A forward unit found itself trapped between collapsing corridors and a surge of corrupted wraith constructs. No exit, no reinforcements. One of the defenders low-ranking, no psychic attunement, screamed for anything, anyone, and threw a broken blade against the wall in despair. The blade struck Stonen, split into three. From the fragments a spear formed, wraithbone, laced with blackened crystal. She picked it up. She fought. She lived. When her unit was recovered, the spear was gone. In its place, a line etched into the floor, in an alphabet no longer taught. The rough translation. You remembered how to ask. Not all weapons arrive cleanly. One was found buried in the chest of a seer moments before he would have succumbed to psychic overstrain. A thin hook-edged dagger, glowing with lines of gold. It had pierced his heart, and also cut the tendrils of the demon that had begun to entwine his mind. The seer lived, barely. The dagger could not be removed. His robes now grow around it. His visions stutter with static. The Ghostsmith leaves no signature, no known forging marks. Yet every weapon attributed to him, Morit, or them bears the same impossible symmetry, as if grown from the user's shadow. Not personalized, but preordained. There are no instructions, no formal rites, only the weapon, and the moment it was needed most. Bonesingers have long debated the possibility of a psycho-spiritual echo capable of autonomous creation, a resonance-based ghost lingering in the heart of the craft world, emerging only when the psychic lattice resonates at a precise harmonic of desperation. But this theory fails to explain one crucial fact. The weapons have appeared on ships, on moons. Once, during a retreat through the webway, a blade was found already lodged in the lock of a sealed portal, perfectly shaped to fit the gate's forgotten mechanism. The wielder later reported that she had dreamed of that blade for years, always out of reach. She had never touched a forge. The Aeldari believe the ghostsmith is not a being, but a moment, a convergence of memory and will, where the collective grief of a people shapes something into reality. They believe that in the split second between surrender and defiance, there is a window, and through it, the weapon steps, not summoned, invited. One solitary myth, suppressed by most Craftworlds, tells of an ancient bonesinger who refused to die, not through immortality, but through repetition. At every time an Eldar dies holding one of his creations, the echo of his soul is renewed, not in the infinity circuit, in the blade, in the rifle, in the glove that catches a blow before the mind knows to raise it. This theory is denied in all formal circles, but among those who have received such weapons, there is a common detail, a scent, not of promethium, not of steel, but of smoke, cold and old and sweet, like the last curl of incense from a funeral pyre, long extinguished. The scent fades quickly. The weapon does not. No known ritual can summon the ghostsmith. No command can reach it. It answers only to a kind of silence, a specific, aching readiness. The moment before the breath, the instant before the fall. It does not save. It does not explain. It simply gives. And when the battle is over, the weapon is often gone. No trophy, no proof, only a question, asked in a whisper. No one remembers speaking. Who made this? And the answer, always just beyond hearing, shaped not in words, but in feeling. I was already here. There is a room in every craft world, a room without a map. It is never labeled, never spoken of in seer councils, never acknowledged in war doctrine or shrine rite, and yet it exists, quiet, constant, sealed not by mechanism or code, but by something deeper, consensus. There is no door, no opening, but every Eldar knows where it is, even if they have never seen it. They pass by without turning their heads, without adjusting their stride. They forget it, precisely, and by design. The weapon inside is not named. It is not revered. It is not even feared. It is waited for. In the deepest layers of the Craftworld's psychoreactive wraithbone, beneath the infinities, beneath the chambers of memory, beyond the reach of even the most attuned spirit seers, there is a chamber, a void, not empty, hollow, a space shaped around an absence so exact it could only have been designed for a single object. There is no light inside, and yet the walls gleam faintly with a pulse that does not match the Craftworld's heartbeat. A rhythm slow enough to be missed, fast enough to be remembered. No bonesinger has ever entered it. None were ever trained to. The path to its shaping was never passed down. It has no resonance signature, no crafting notes, no origin scroll. When the oldest among the seers are asked about the vault, they grow quiet, not secretive, just still, as if listening for something they no longer expect to hear. The weapon has no shape, not because it is unseen, but because no mind has yet perceived it correctly. Those few who have approached the edge of the vault, those on the brink of apotheosis, or madness, or death, describe different impressions. A spear that hums a song of endings, a gun that vibrates in time with no calendar, a blade that shows the reflection of someone who hasn't yet been born. All insist the weapon knows they are there. None report contact. It waits, not like a stored tool, not like a relic locked away until war demands it. This is not contingency. This is attention, focused, patient, ancient, older than the fall, perhaps older than war itself, not because it predates them, but because it will outlast them. Some believe it is not a weapon at all, that the chamber is a wound, that the Craftworld carries within it a cavity shaped like violence never used, that the Eldar, in all their pain and prophecy, knew they would one day reach a choice too heavy to make without help, and so they shaped a silence deep enough to hold it, and waited. Others argue the weapon is a god fragment, a sliver of Enid's unborn certainty, a crystallized decision waiting to be activated by a soul clear enough, willing enough, lost enough to become its bearer, not a wielder, a vessel. There is no record of anyone ever retrieving it, and yet stories persist. Warriors who fought without gear, yet struck with impossible precision, guardians whose shots landed before their rifles were raised, one farseer who simply pointed, and an entire enemy battalion ceased to be. No trace, no explosion, only dust caught mid-fall, like snow frozen in thought. Were these the weapons doing, or echoes of something it remembers? The question is never answered, only avoided. The weapon does not protect. It does not judge. It listens. It listens when Eldar cry out in desperation, and does not move. It listens when bones break, and craftworlds fall, and names are forgotten, and does not speak. It listens when victories are won, at terrible cost, when souls flicker into the infinity circuit without closure. It listens to all of it, every scream, every whisper, every silent, unspoken wish for something stronger than prophecy, more permanent than loss. And still, it waits. It is possible, terribly possible, that the weapon will never be wielded, that it was not made for war at all, that it is not even finished, that its forging continues every time an Eldar chooses defiance over despair, that every act of survival hammers another edge into its shape, that the bearer it awaits is not born, but becoming. One theory, never spoken aloud, suggests the weapon is not meant for the Eldar, that it will be handed to another at the final end, a moment when the species is gone, the circuit's cold, the craftworld silent, and still, something remains, a final gift, a final word. The Harlequins say nothing about it. When asked directly, they only smile. "You've already seen it," one once said. "You just haven't needed to remember." In the sealed chamber, the pressure never changes, the hum never breaks, the silence never resolves, and the weapon, whatever it is, never moves. It doesn't have to, because it knows. One day, someone will stand at the edge, not by accident, not by command, but because every other path will have ended, because the blade, the gun, the edge will no longer be waiting. It will have been called, and in that moment, the silence will end, but not before, because the weapon is not asleep, it is listening.